The meme depicts a restaurant goer positing the statement, "Thank you for this carefully seasoned dish. Do you have any Heinz barbecue sauce?" Below, a caption reads, "The question every chef fears." The implication, the unsophistication of the Heinz sauce. The viewer's eye is then naturally drawn to the inflated and blown out appearance of the waiter's upper body. Abundantly clear is the lack of a response from him. In fact, the blank white space around the head of the waiter prompts us, as the viewer, to anticipate what his response might be. Thus, the meme evokes a perceived inflation of time, as our waiter struggles to muster a proper reply between the end of the patron's utterance and the start of the waiter's own. A deeper humor, then, arises from the dilemma of the waiter, or the chef, who must decide whether to honor the integrity of his creation or simply please his customer. Knowledgeable of the service industry, the viewer already knows what the waiter must begrudgingly answer. The centered meme sets on a picture of the Goo Lagoon. The caption reads, "Fishes be like I know a place, and take you here." What we have is humor via a sudden perspectival shift. While initially parsing the image, we would naturally categorize the Goo Lagoon as an obscure, unusual location. The caption, however, seems to expect that the Goo Lagoon would, to the viewer, be a predictable location for a date. The humor comes at the moment we realize that to a resident of Bikini Bottom, this would in fact be the case. As the viewer takes on the perspective of a Bikini Bottom resident, they unwittingly stumble into two contradictory, yet equally valid, conceptions of the lagoon. One in which it is eccentric, and one in which it is banal. Humor is the result of an attempt to hold both in the mind. Above and below the meme are auxiliary captions, seemed to be added on after the fact. They mimic an overzealous fan, overeager to ensure you enjoy the meme. I think it works, because, for me at least, the reaction is close enough to something that I genuinely think, but it's also something that I'd obviously recognize to be a faux pas, and I wouldn't actually say it. And I guess this is true for all of the awkward characters that I do. I think it somehow gets into a repressed part of your mind, the way that you might act if you really had no shame. And it becomes funny because of how full of shame we are. How much effort we do put into making our speech agreeable to others. This meme format is called Bro Explaining. The caption reads, "And then Oedipus throws the old guy out of the chariot. The craziest part? The dude turns out to be his father." Beyond the image itself, I think there are several levels to why this particular caption works. Specifically, its wording allows us to intuit what else must have been going on in the scene. And I think it ties strongly to the phenomenon I mentioned in the meme before. First, the Oedipus myth is a fairly long story, so the guy's clearly been going at this for a while. I also like the way he phrases the last sentence as a big punchline, as it shows that this guy's fully confident that his partner is as interested as he is. This is even funnier when you consider the content of the Oedipus myth, in that the interesting part isn't really the myth itself, but presumably Freud's interpretation of the myth. So he's essentially emphasizing the wrong part of the story, which further shows how unskilled he is with communication, in a reality where most people, and presumably the viewer, put lots of care into how they come across. This one's very similar. With the topic changed to the Cold War instead of Oedipus, humor is added in that it's a more absurd thing to assume someone hasn't heard of before, but humor is lost in that it's also a less absurd thing to explain at a basketball game. The biggest addition, I think, is in the line, "Not one shot was fired." I think this line adds a lot of value because it's something everyone in America has heard before. And I think oftentimes pulling out a cliche like that in a comedic setting really lets the audience see how absurd it is. And the humor comes not just from the fact that people use the cliche, but also from the viewer's own shock that they themselves hadn't already realized its absurdity, that the absurdity had to be pointed out at all. And so the phrase functions sort of the same way as the Goo Lagoon did. There's a jump from seeing the object one way to seeing the object a wholly different way. Another layer, and this is the same as with the previous meme, the fact that, this guy's clearly just regurgitating something that was told to him. If he actually understood it, he'd be putting it in his own words. I just think it really adds to the absurdity of his character and how he acts in a way that the viewer is perhaps categorically afraid of acting. The meme reads, "I'd rather be a sausage than a hot dog. To be frank." Obviously, with the bottom line serving as a pun, as we're talking about literally being a frank. The joke benefits in that the term frank, similarly to "not one shot was fired," is another one of those antiquated yet ubiquitous phrases. Something silly, but that we otherwise might not think twice about. The meme presents us with the well-established word frank and blindsides us with its true nature. We laugh as we realize it has been unusual this whole time. And that gets to a deeper point in comedy. If everything comes down to alternate possible categorizations, from my experience, an unsuccessful joke often asks the audience to see the alternate categorization, whereas a successful joke more pulls it out and smacks you with it. If you have to put conscious effort into finding the contradiction, the mechanism of humor just doesn't really get triggered. At least, not in the same way as when something catches you off guard. Another thing that I think can make a joke good is recursion. By which I mean having lots of small, unusual things layered together in a compact way, or unusual things within other unusual things. For instance, the word frank within the phrase "to be frank" within this odd-looking, ironic meme format. I sometimes imagine an unusualness threshold where once you pack enough absurdity into one statement, then the statement suddenly changes from being merely unusual into being comedic. Back to our meme in question, we can take note of the very tacky presentation. The style evokes a simpler, very unfunny type of meme, despite being neither. And so, to put it concisely, The meme embraces the aesthetic of unsophistication, but pulls it off too well to actually be unsophisticated. Its arrangement is too bizarre to be an accident, and the caption is admittedly clever. There's much more going on than I can put into words, but I do know if this meme isn't a cry for help, I don't know what is. Like, honestly, it perplexes me that more of you aren't already worried. This is one of those memes where, to appreciate it, you gotta know about Coca-Cola's notable 1994 lawsuit against Polar Corp. However, the viewer may instead deduce the information simply with a close reading. I find that socially improper speech or behavior is often comedic, especially when it's more subtle, and I think this meme has two good examples of that. Of course, not in the way that the characters act, but rather in the way the creator of the meme conveys the information. First, memes of this format are supposed to be relatable, whereas this one violates that rule to the point of absurdity. Secondly, there's additional humor in the unnecessary, socially improper use of tedious legal language. On top of all of that, the concept of the lawsuit itself becomes funny because of the way it is described. The legal description paints a very cold, calculated picture of the advertisement, which is an alternate categorization to the more natural, emotional way we would categorize something like this commercial. The humor works because we don't doubt that this seemingly simple ad is indeed quite manufactured. And so, the alternate categorization is genuine, and the humor executes. Also, I actually found the original advertisement. It's linked in the description. Highly suggest you watch it. Great stuff.